In today's video, guys, we're going to be showing you guys how to build a timber deck and frame. So for your deck, you'll need 6x2 treated timber C24.
Now we've got the timber for our frame, we're going to be bolting it to a wall because we've got a wall on ours, but if you haven't, you can put posts in the floor and pick this first one up. We're going to show you the hardware we're going to be using to attach it to the wall, and then the hangers that we're going to be using. So we're going to go through step by step. Let's get on with the first bit.
So we've got to fix the timber to the wall. We've got a lot of obstacles in the way at the moment, so we're going to show you how to get over it.
So what I'm doing here is I'm going to cut some pieces to bolt to the wall and cut these sections out, and then I'm going to put a second piece on front so that we come over all of the pipe work that's on the wall. So I'll get on with that now and we'll show you exactly how we're getting over these problems.
To cut your timber, you're going to want to use either a circular saw, a hand saw or a miter saw. Right, so you can see Phil has cut all his timbers around the pipes ready to be fixed on. He's also piloted the holes in it ready for the wall fixings, and Phil's going to show you how right now.
Right, so we've got 16mm fixings, so I've got a 16mm auger bit, and all I'm doing is just drilling through the timber like so, and that's going to allow for our SDS when we come to bolt it to the wall. Right,
so now we're actually going to start fixing our wood to the wall, and we've worked out exactly what we want. We want just a tiny little step off the door, so we're actually going to get our first one in. We've marked the wall where we're going to start, and then we'll level off afterwards. So we're going to grab our 16mm bit, because that's the size of the fixings that's going to go in the wall, and we're going to make our first hole just here. So now it's time to grab your wall fasteners, and you literally put them through the pre-drilled hole you got and line it up into your masonry wall, and we're going to grab a hammer and tap it in. So you need to hit them all the way in, and that's the sound you're looking for. Right, so before we fully fasten it to the wall this side, in case it grips, we're going to grab a boat level. So this helps because obviously we've got a lot of obstacles in the way, to level up this side, because obviously we want to level as we're going across. Right, now grab your ratchet, and how these fasteners work, as we tighten this bolt up, they open up and they grip the wall, and that's what creates a nice fix. So we have our first fastener fixed in the wall, and now it's time to work our way along this wall, getting it level, and then we'll go over that side and level that side out. So I've got my next pre-drilled hole. I'm going to make sure it's level on this boat level, and then let's put another fixing in the wall. Right, so we've got our first section in, and a little top tip when you've got to get across obstacles is if you grab some scraps of wood and use them as spacers to get to the next section, that way when you're bolting this section in, you know where your level is. This is only a tip. If you've got a laser level, use that, but this is a fantastic idea.
Right, now that we've got our sections bolted to the wall, if you haven't got all this pipe work going on, you can just bolt a solid piece, but obviously because we've had to do it this way. Because these are now clearing the pipe work, I'm going to measure from all the way across here, which is 1.6 metres for us, and we're going to cut that as a solid piece, and I'm then going to cut holes to clearance the bolts, and we're going to bolt that as a solid piece on the front. So I'll do that now and I'll show you what it looks like. So I've marked where my bolts are going to be coming through. I've got myself a hole saw, and it's bigger than the bolts, so it allows a bit of movement. So I'll just cut these out, and then it should go over the front. Right, so as you can see, we've got some clearance holes now for where our bolts are, and if we put this in, it'll make sense what we're trying to achieve. So that's going to get fixed to the plate behind with some timber screws, and then we can put our hangers onto this. So we're going to do that all the way across and then start putting our hangers on.
Right, before we carry on assembling the frame, we need to put down some membrane to stop any weeds coming up in the future. So let's get on with that job.
Right, you can grab weed membrane from either your timber merchants where you grab your timber from, or any local DIY store, and it's as simple as just rolling it out and cutting it down, and just make sure that you overlap it on each run, because it stops the weed coming through and up.
Right, now that our weed membrane has been put down, it's time to start putting our hangers on. So that is a hanger. It's been sized to our rafters, which are 6x2s or 2x6s if you're American. And the reason I've got a scrap here is because when I'm laying these out, which I'm going to show you now, I like to use this because it tells me where to put our hangers so that our rafters or our joists are flush with the top. So I'm going to hold that there. And then what we do to install these, we use something called a twist nail. So it's a nail and it's twisted, like the name suggests. So we work to 400 centres. So that means that we measure from centre to centre of our joists at 400 millimetres. And I think in America it's like 16 inches. But at 400, so if I mark here, we want 400 mil. So a good tip, if you just mark the right hand side, like so, if we're working to the left, we can measure 400 from that. Like so. Mark it. And if you scribble on the left hand side, our next one will sit there. We've got some obstacles we need to go around, like these steps. So for here, we're going to put a joist there, one on the other side, and to get around this we're going to hang another joist across, and that's going to pick these up, which will all become clear once we get these joists in place. When you're installing your hangers, a little tip for you, so there's a couple of ways to do it. You can either nail it directly to your joists and then put it on, or if you get yourself a scrap, put it inside, go up to your marks every 400 if you remember. And then what you do is you line it up, hold your bracket, get rid of that, and then just pick any hole. So we're going to go with this one, and all we care about is that nail not moving. It doesn't matter about this because it's already in place. Get that nail in, get our block back again, and another nail. Remember twist nails. Make sure we're still lined up on the top. Make sure we're tight, and then we nail one in the other side. So now that's flush. And we're square. And what we want to do now is we want to put a nail in every hole we can. So I'll do that now, and then we're going to be folding the tops over. Right, now that we've got our nails all the way through the front, we want to bend the tops over. Like that, and then we want to nail the tops down. And what this section does is it gives it a lot more strength because it's pulling down against the nail. So it's important to get them folded over. It's much more stronger. And that's what you're looking for. All the nails are in. So we're going to get the rest in and move on to the next step. Right, now that we've got our hangers in, we can start putting our joists in. And what Brad's doing there is he's sighting down the wood looking for the crown because we want that at the top. So I'll show you exactly what you're looking for. So when you lay it flat, so you'll look down this way, what we're looking for is the arch. So timber's normally got an arch, it's natural inside of it. We want this at the top, and the idea is when you put pressure on, it's less likely to bow further down, it will go flat. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to carry on, keep looking down, checking the crown, putting it at the top. So we'll get all these in and go to the next step. Right, so now we've got the bulk of our joists in. We've left the middle, and we'll come back to that and explain how we're going to do that section. I've cut a piece to go on the ends because these timbers ain't quite long enough for the deck. So what we do is we make sections up. So we're going to get on with this section, and then we'll add a section to it. We've squared this one up with our wall here, and then I've brought this over so it's in line with this fence because we're going to have to add a section in here. So if you've got anything like that, it doesn't matter. We just get on with the bulk and we can add to it after. So I'm going to use a nail gun, or you can use screws and a screw gun. And we're going to nail the first one in. So I'll do that now. So now that we've got our first one set in, I'm going to take the measurements from down there and bring them down here so that every one of them is exactly the same. It mirrors up there. We've got a 400 gap. So we're going to do the exact measurement down there. So as you can see, that might look straight, but we're actually about 4 inches off here. So that actually needs to go there. So now these are all parallel. That's what we're aiming for. So we're going to do that for every single one. We're going to measure from this one to that one, from this one to that one. Don't measure from here. Always measure from this because that's our reference. So let's do that, nail them in, and I'll show you the next step.
Right, so as you can see, Phil's putting the frames together, but we've not actually levelled anything yet, so don't get worried. We're going to do that at a later stage. We're just going to actually get the frame together, then we pick the front up, and we're all in good time.
Right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to get some scraps, some offcuts, and these two strong men are going to pull the frame up with a level on this far side, the one we've been working from, until that's level. I'm going to screw these in temporarily, and then we're going to move over to that side and get that level as well.
So as we're lifting the frame, we've got to put it back into the hangers.
Yeah?
Yep. Right, now that we've got it level, we're going to now level across this way.
Right, so now that we've levelled off this little side here, we've got to make sure it's absolutely perfect across this way and across this way before we move on with the deck.
Right, now that we're happy with that section, this section here we're going to do exactly the same. So we're going to put our front piece on, nail it rather than put our hangers in because it's easier to do it that way. Settle our distances and then bring this up level. As soon as we've done that, we're going to hang a piece across there, and that is going to hold the last of our joists that are going to come through it.
We've now built our two frames.
And what we've done is we've transferred our level across using a spirit level, got it nice and level, and then used temporary feet to hold it up in place until we're ready to put our actual feet in, which you'll see later in the video. And we're going to move on to this centre section. Right, if you haven't got any obstacles in the way, what you can do, you can just run your joists all the way through as one solid base. But because we've got these steps and we can't mount to them, we're going to put ourselves 2 pieces of timber in. We're using 2 because we need the strength, because it's going to be carrying this section of decking between these 2. So we use a double hanger. So it's just one of these, but it takes 2 sets of timbers. It's known as a double trimmer because it's doubled up. And the reason is for pure strength. So we'll get this put in now and show you what it looks like with the hangers on. Right, so now it should be starting to make sense what we're doing. So we've got the double here that's then picked up these ones here. So we've got another 2 or maybe 3 to go in here. And if you look over here, you'll see that I've got 2 together, and you might be thinking, well, you said 400 centres. When I say 400 centres, I mean no more than 400. So we've got a drain here. So if I'd have gone to the other side of the drain, it would have been over 400. So I've added an extra one closer, and it'll be the same in the middle. So if you've got a section where you can't quite get your 400, it's better to have more than less. So we're going to get these hung in, get our hangers on, and then show you how we add these extra bits in.
Right, so that's it. We've got all the main joists in place, and we've temporarily pinned the front. And now it's time to fix the rest of the hangers along the front, all the way across the deck, and we'll catch up with you in a sec. Right, that's it. We've got all the hangers installed. So if your deck is going to be longer than the timbers available, you're going to need to extend it, and we're going to show you how right now.
Right, so to extend it, it's very simple. All we've done is measured the width and cut ourselves 2 pieces of timber, and then we've measured the length of what we need to add on, and we've cut exactly the same amount of joists as we've got in the previous frame. And the reason we do that is when we screw our deck on, the screws will run all the way through, because it's not very nice to look at when screws step over because we've moved our joists. A quick tip to do that: we've sat our piece on top, flush with the edge. We've got ourselves a roofing square, which is actually a triangle. We then roll up to it, mark it with a pencil, and just put a little scribble there so you know where you're putting it. And we'll do that all the way across, and that will give us the exact same lines all the way through the deck frame. We can then stand that up, transfer your marks down the face, like so. And when we bring it down to our joists, we can just nail them off or screw them if you've got a screw gun. Right, now that we've marked that one, we're going to do exactly the same on the face of it, and then we'll start assembling it.
Right, so now it's time to come to assemble the frame. You can see it makes it a lot more easier with the marks on. Phil's actually demonstrating with a screw gun and outside screws in case you guys at home have not got a nail gun.
Right, so I've put the frame together. Me and Brad have just lifted it into place and sat it on some blocks. And all I'm going to do is just put some screws in the back just to hold it in place for now. And then once we get this set level with some feet, temporary like these, to hold it up flat, we're going to be putting some coach bolts through, which are these. So it's just a threaded bar with a flat top. And then we put a square washer and a bolt, and that's going to bolt these 2 pieces of decked frame together so they will never come apart, ever.
Right, so we're just levelling the next section by putting temporary legs in. So I'm lifting the frame up, and Phil's going to screw the legs in once the bubbles reach level. And that side is level. We're going to move across to that side and level that side out.
Right, now that we've got all of the framework done, it's time to move on to putting some noggins in. On a big deck like this, we're going to put them every couple of metres, and what they're used for is to increase the rigidity of the deck, and it also stops the joists from twisting, so it keeps them all up straight. So we're just going to measure off this back plate. He's going to measure off that side down there, old Brad. We're going to mark our marks. So grab yourself a chalk line. And all the tools we use in this video will be listed below in the description. And now we've got our line, we can start putting our noggins in. So when you're measuring for your actual noggins, you want to measure down at the wall plate or your other end where they're fixed solid, because if you measure in the middle like so, they flex, so you're not going to have an accurate measurement. And when it comes to fixing them in, you can either fix them in a straight line coming all the way through, but it will mean that you'll have to fix through at an angle because you can't get to the ends, or you can actually stagger them left and right, so they'll go one there and so on and so forth. Either works, whatever one you want to choose. Neither's better than the other, they both do the same job. So let's get our noggins in now.
When you're installing your noggins, you just got to make sure that they sit flush with the top of your existing joist, because if you fire them in slightly higher, when you come to put your deck in, it will show a little ramp. So just make sure, if it does fire in slightly higher, just get your hammer and you can whack it back down to make sure it's completely flush.
Right, so here is a prime example of why we measure at the ends. Oh, miles too big, but if we throw it to Brad,
it fits perfect, and that's the reason why you measure this end and then install them this way, because it straightens up the frame.
So to get something like this in where it looks like it's just never going to fit, if you just put your legs either side and you can sort of push it out, and then it will hold in place, and now that's straightened that run out.
Right, that's it. We've got all the noggins installed, and now it's time to install the posts.
Right, so for our post, we're going to be using a 4x4 treated post like this right here, and all we've done is we've took an average measurement from the patio up to the top and cut them all to size and just laid them all out where we're going to be putting them. If you haven't got a concrete substrate or a patio like we have that's solid, you're going to be burying them in mud. Then it's the same process, but except you're going to dig your post holes, set them in concrete, and then we're going to be bolting them up, which we're going to show you now. And the layout we've gone, because we've got 6x2s, we're not spanning any more than sort of 2.5 metres down the run, and we've got a post within a metre. So there's a post every metre you can measure. So we're going to have one over here, so that's no more than a metre, and we're going to do that throughout the whole deck.
Right, now it's time to install your post, but before we do that, we need to install some DPC. And what that is for, it rests underneath, and that prevents moisture from coming up from the ground.
So now we've got all our posts laid out where we want them, it's time to fix them to the frame. And the way we do that is using coach bolts, square plate washer and a nut. They look like these. And we use ourselves an auger bit to pilot hole through, because these can cut really quickly and really cleanly. And when we're fixing to the face like we are here, I'm using a Fosner bit larger than the bolt, and what that's going to do is recess this into the timber so it isn't protruding. Everywhere else we can just fix it in as normal, but anywhere where there's a face where we're going to be putting timber over, we just recess this through, otherwise you're going to have this bulge on the front. And what we do, we put 2 bolts per post, and we don't stack them above each other, so you see these are offset at an angle, and what that does is it prevents the grain from splitting. If you put 2 above each other, there's a high chance the post will crack open. So we've got our bolts below the face of the wood, so they're not going to cause us any problems when we come to put our timber on the front. As we're moving around now with the rest of our posts, we're going to take our level. If we need to tweak the deck, now's our chance when we're putting the feet on. So obviously we did already level up with our temporary feet, but just double check, because once these are bolted in, that's the finished height of your whole inside deck. And now we're going to get on with the rest of our posts, and then we're going to show you the next steps. This is Phil reporting to you live from the decking job. The weather has become fantastic, and I can't wait to show you more in this sunshine. Now that our posts are all bolted in place and finished, there's one last step before we put the old top on, the bit you've been waiting for, and that is something called a bearer. So our feet are not on every single joist. As you can see, we've got a foot here, but we've got nothing there. And because our deck is longer than 3 meters, so if yours is longer than 3 meters, this applies to you, we're going to install something called a bearer, and that is basically this. So here's our 2 posts. These 2 joists had 0 support from those posts. But now that we've put our bearers in, which are timbers bolted to the sides of the post, these are now solid and they won't be bouncing. So it's just a case of getting your timbers underneath, pulling them up tight to your joists, and then we're going to be screwing them in, and then we're going to be putting a screw down at an angle through our joist, and that's just going to stop any rattling and bouncing. It keeps them tight together. So we pull it in tight to the post and we pull up tight, and if we go down at an angle, this is now tight together. We're not going to get any rattling in the future. So now we've got our first one in. We're going to do the same on the opposite side, same process, pulling it up tight, and you'll end up with the 2 parallel pieces of timber holding up the deck. And what I like to do, my method, fix it to one post, pull it tight up to all the joists, and then I'll fix it to my last post. Before we put the top on our deck frame, we're going to have to protect it. And what we like to use is Wolverstrong's deck tape, and the reason we like to use that is it's got a 25-year guarantee, and it's going to stop your frame from rotting, and that is the main thing that goes. So it will be listed below, so go check it out. So nice and simple, it's basically tape. You take the backing off, put it centre of your joists, roll your hand over it and just wrap it around the edge slightly. And the good thing with this is you can just put it on and lay your deck. You ain't got to wait for any of that old paint to dry. It don't go everywhere. And once you get to the end, it's just a simple step of tearing it. And if you have got like doubles or triples, they sell all different sizes. So here's one of their wider versions. So on that, we'll be using that on the doubles and any triples that we've got. Right, so we're going to get on with the rest of the deck, remembering that we're also covering the tops of our posts because we don't want any surfaces that are going to hold water to be exposed. So let's get on with it. Right, our frame is completely protected, including our posts. So now it is time to start installing the deck top. On this deck, we're going to be using pine, but the installation applies to all hardwood, softwood and composite. So it applies to all your deck types. So let's get on with this first one. So on our very first piece, we're going to be starting at the front because that's going to look visually better to look at. Nice full pieces all the way through. We're going to be having a slight overhang. So we're going to have our face piece there, a small little 10mm overhang. You don't have to do this, but we want to. We're going to be fixing down this end, now that we've lined this up, with some decking screws. So any decking screws, as long as they're suitable for decks. And we're going to be putting them in the middle of the frame. On the rest of the pieces, we're going to be going on the 2 outsides, but because there's only frame here, we're going to go here. And then we're going to do the same on the opposite end. And now what we're going to do is make sure this first piece is perfectly straight. Simple way to check whether this is perfectly straight. Get yourself a chalk line or a string line, and we're just going to hook it over our frame and pull it next to our ball. Try not to get chalk on it if you are using a chalk line, obviously. And then we're just going to pull it next to our first piece, and we're looking absolutely spot on that. But if it does need adjusting, you can just push these in and out. This first one's super important to get straight. So now that we know it's straight, let's put some fixings in it. And now our first piece is fixed in place and it's nice and straight. We're going to move on to the next one. And what we've got here is a finished edge. So we're just lining up this edge here. We've got ourselves a 3mm spacer. Now, with the spacers, this timber's quite dry, and you'll know when you pick it up, it feels really heavy. If it's like that and it's wet, we wouldn't put spacers in, we just butt them up tight, because when they shrink, you'll end up with a small gap. But because these are nice and dry, we're going to put ourselves a 3mm packer in, start at the end again with our 2 fixings. But now we're going to be putting them on the outsides of each board, nice and tight. Now you can see the importance of putting this first one in straight. So most deck boards have slight bends and curves. So what we're doing with this spacer is we're going to pull this in and adjust it as we go. So we've got our 3mm on the next one, put our 2 fixings in, and then move to the next one. And the reason I bow it away is because it's easier to pull it in than it is to try and push it out. But when you are pulling these into your 3mm gap, don't just be putting a 3mm in the end and tightening it down like with a clamp or someone to assist you, because we're tight here but we're actually loose here. So if I'd have tightened that to the 3mm there, this one would have been too small. So you need to work your way through one at a time. And as you can see, we're putting 2 fixings in at every single joist. We're not missing any. We need plenty of fixings in these because they will try to lift and move. And another thing to note is if you've got some smooth decking, one side should be grooved like this, and that is to prevent any moisture getting trapped underside. This is on both for us, so we're going to be putting it this way up. But if you have got some smooth decking, one side is normally grooved, and that is the side that goes down. So as we're running in this first set of bolts, I've got a little bit here that we can't quite get enough pressure on. So I'm going to show you a little trick. We fixed a block to the joist behind, and we've got ourselves a clamp. And a lot of clamps now reverse. This is a Bessie clamp. There are many clamps like this clamp, but this clamp is mine. And all we do, we've reversed the jaws, and we're just going to pump the clamp up until we get our little spacer nice and tight. So there's a little trick for you. Right, so now we've got all the shorter pieces fixed into place, ready to be cut down because we've oversailed them. We're now going to be putting in the full length pieces with a join. So when we're going to be adding pieces to a run, because that is a full length and it doesn't quite reach, we lay it out, we've lined up our other edge exactly where we want to finish the deck, and then we come to the nearest joist that we can land on, and lucky for us it's nearly perfect, and we're going to mark the centre of that joist on our piece of decking. So now that we've got our mark, we're going to take a speed square, that's a speed square there, and we're just going to give ourselves a square mark across the board. And there's a few ways you can cut this. You can either use a hand saw, a skill saw, or a miter saw. So we're going to start with a skill saw. So quick tip for you on that. Get your speed square, line your blade up with your mark, hold this tight against your timber, and you run the plate across the speed square, and that will give you a perfectly square cut every time. Right, so as we fixed all the rest previous, we've got 2 screws. The only difference I do here is I come back about 25mm from the edge because we don't want to split our board, hold our 3mm spacer in, and then we screw at a slight angle and sink our screws, and that's just going to prevent the edge from splitting and cracking. Work our way along this one, and then we're going to show you the cut here. Right, so now we've got our first full length in place and fixed down. What we're going to be doing is measuring for this piece here, and the easiest way to do that is to go to your previous board, hook it over the end, and measure to the next board. We've got 885. Now, some people like to leave a small expansion gap here. I won't be doing that. I'll butt them up, and the reason I do that is because we've got space on the 2 edges for the boards to push away from each other. I prefer to butt joint this, so we'll go and cut that and get it installed and move on. Right, so now we've got our piece cut. What I like to do is when I install these, I put my screws in. So I'll put these ones at an angle, remember, because we're near the edge. And then I'll leave them like that, and I'll make sure we've got our 3mm space, hold the board in place, and then I'll sink them in. And the reason I put my screws in like that and then put them in is it frees up my hands so I can move the boards around without having to try and hold screws. So our first little row here with the extension or the added piece is now in, but what we're going to be doing is alternating our joints. And the reason we do that is because you don't want a same row of joints all in one side. It looks like an addition, a bit you forgot about. So we like to stagger them backwards and forwards. So it's the same process. We've lined that end up. We mark the centre of our joist, the nearest one. So for us, it's this one. That's the closest we can get to the end of the board. Take our skill saw, and now we've moved into the centre of some joists so we can cut without cutting through any of our joists. And we keep the foot of the saw square with the square. Right, so just remember, as you're laying the deck, every 5 to 6 rows, get your string line or your chalk line and pull it and make sure you're still straight. If you're not, because it's very easy to start deviating off, just change the size of the packers where you need it and just pack that bit back to straight. So just every 5, 6, just double check. Right, so now we're going to show you how to cut around a little obstacle, a fence post. Very common to have those in your deck. So we've cut our piece to length, butted it up to the previous one, and I've got myself my speed square, and we're just going to slide it up. And if you can't really do it by eye, if you just grab yourself a 3mm packer, because we want a gap around everything, we just push that up to our packer like so, and we just mark our board. And then to get the other mark, we just pull this off, put our packer alongside, and then we just mark this, remembering we want that 3mm gap again. And now we've got our 2 marks, we just take our speed square, lock it over the end and mark down and join the 2 lines together like so, and we just take all this out using a jigsaw. And once we've cut it out, give it an old test fit, make sure we've done the right thing, and as you can see we've got a nice uniform gap all the way around our post. We can start getting some full runs in again. So now I'm going to show you how to scribe up to something, which basically means cut into shape these little pieces here. So a quick easy tip, we're going to line our board up with the previous row nice and flush. So I've got a scrap of old decking because it's the exact same width, and then we just push it up to our wall and we mark along the edge like so, and we're going to do that all the way along. We're going to cut 5mm extra off to allow for our expansion. So we're going to get that marked up and cut and show you it put in. And if you follow that technique, you'll end up with a nice little scribe to finish off the main part of your decking. So we're now at the stage where we want to cut off any excess deck. So to get our mark, we put our tape measure up to the frame. So for us, we've got 155 and our overhang is 35mm. So we take the 35 from the 155 and that's going to give us 120mm left. And then we just hook over the top and mark 120mm. So when we cut that, you'll see we've got our 35mm overhang left. So same process on the other end. We slide this under. I've got 685mm. 685mm, that is the edge of my frame. But we've deducted 35mm, so we're at 650, and what that's going to give us is our overhang that we want on our deck. Right, so now that we've got our marks, we hook our chalk line onto one end, pull it over to our next mark, put some tension in it, and then you just ping it like that, and that is where we'll be cutting the deck. So there's a few methods to cut along our line now. You can use a skill saw, and we get ourselves a straight edge. We fix our straight edge down with our blade lined up on our line. So we'd clamp that or screw it or use a piece of timber, it doesn't matter what, as long as it's nice and straight. You can use a handsaw, but unless you're very good with a handsaw, you might not get the best finish. We're going to be using a track saw or a plunge saw. Right, so we've lined the edge of our track up with our mark. We've set the depth on our track saw, our plunge saw. And now we're just going to start cutting. And on this last little section, obviously we can't get right up to the edges with a circular blade. You can do jigsaw, multi-tool, but we're going to go old school and get the old hand saw out. Right now it is time to start putting the front of our deck on, which is as simple as getting yourself a tape measure. We're going to measure the length. So we've got our length, we're going to cut one. Oh, thanks, Brad.
Here's one we made earlier.
And it's the same as the top. We're going to be putting 2 screws, one at the bottom, one at the top.
Just make sure when you're putting these on that you miss the hangers or the other brackets when bolting it on.
Right, so now when we're going to put our second piece on, we measure from our already installed piece because we've gained the thickness of the deck that we've installed. And when we're putting our screws in, just try to avoid any hangers or bolts or fixings that you've got. We'll hop that up now.
And also, when doing this, if you put the screws first on the ground, then lift it up, it makes it a lot easier and it frees up your hands when fixing these in. So Phil, how many screws should we actually stick in the face?
I think you should be putting 2 screws every 400mm along the whole length of the deck, anywhere you're installing it, because it holds it nice and tight and stops it from cupping.
And that's a wrap from the Home Improvements channel. We hope you enjoyed this decking video.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Peace.